I'm most honored to give a few opening remarks at this meeting dedicated to the Cosmopolitanism, an invitation for Confucian Catholic dialogue. I give a special welcome and word of gratitude to our distinguished speakers, and thank you to everyone who attends this meeting. It's also a great honor for me to present this meeting as a fruit of the partnership between Georgetown University and La Civiltà Cattolica. We created together the China Forum for a Civilization Dialogue, a platform for a dialogue with China. A special thanks to President De Gioia for believing in this project and having accompanied it since the beginning. I'm also grateful for the collaboration of Tom Bancroft, Vice President for Global Engagement at Georgetown University. The China Forum aims to be a platform for a meeting and reflection that brings Chinese thought leaders together with international counterparts to discuss common challenges at the intersection of culture, technology, and global society. The forum's first topics are the crisis of ecological civilization, the ethics of artificial intelligence, and humanities education for a global era. I want to remember an image that can guide us in our meeting. President Xi Jinping used the image of many colors in an address to UNESCO in 2014 to describe the magnificent genetic map of the path of human civilizations on the Earth. And he added that the palette of colors of the various civilizations is enriched by greater exchanges and reciprocal learning, offering prospects for the future. That talk was diametrically opposed to the so-called clash of civilizations. Pope Francis also used several times the image of the palette of colors and the polychromatic light, proposing the civilization of encounter as an alternative to the uncivilized clash. The China Forum plans to host expert seminars and high-level public events in leading global cities, including Rome, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Beijing. The alliance between Georgetown University and La Civiltà Cattolica is written in the DNA of our institutions, which gave a great history behind them and are both global. Georgetown University is the oldest Catholic university and largest Jesuit university in the United States, founded in 1789 by Archbishop John Carroll. Georgetown today is a major student-centered international research university offering programs in Washington, D.C., Doha, Qatar, and around the world. La Civiltà Cattolica is a bi-monthly journal founded in 1850 by Pope Pius IX. It's the only journal overseen by the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, and it's among the oldest periodicals in the world. Since 2017, it has appeared in Chinese, Italian, English, Spanish, French, Korean, Russian, and Japanese. The forum carries forward the tradition of Father Matteo Ricci, the early Jesuit missionary whose appreciation of Chinese language, history, and customs provides a model for productive intercultural encounter. In 1601, Ricci wrote an essay on friendship, where he brought together Chinese wisdom and Western wisdom. When you consider your friend as yourself, Ricci wrote, then what is distant becomes close, the weak become strong, the disgraced are brought to prosperity, the sick are healed. This is why we want to talk now about the concept of cosmopolitanism, championed by philosophers East and West, ancient as well as modern, more than ever newly relevant in a world deeply divided along national, ideological, ethic, and other lines. Today, geopolitical and cultural challenges make it essential to deepen our friendship and our encounter on issues relating to our common home, the world, and its harmony. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Spadaro, for those inspiring opening words. And on behalf of Georgetown, I want to emphasize how grateful we are for our many collaborations with you and with your journal, La Civiltà Cattolica. And this, our event today, the China Forum for Civilizational Dialogue, is just one part of a very fruitful friendship. I want to, well, first introduce myself. As Father Spadaro mentioned, I serve as Vice President for Global Engagement here at Georgetown. I'm also a professor of government and foreign service. And I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this webinar this morning here in Washington, D.C. We've got panelists, wonderful panelists you'll hear about in a moment, and an audience that's quite sizable spread around the world. I think you'll all agree that we meet at a time of antagonism, conflict, and indeed war in world affairs. And yet we're here to talk about cosmopolitanism, a juxtaposition that may seem incongruous, but I don't really think that it is. For if we're to move forward in a world so deeply divided, we really need to draw on those resources across our religious and philosophical traditions that underscore what it is we have in common as human beings and our obligations to one another, whatever our ideological and political differences. And the rich tradition of cosmopolitanism is indeed one of those resources. As a Jesuit university, Georgetown is committed to intercultural and interreligious dialogue, service to the common good, to what Pope Francis calls a culture of encounter. It's important to remember, especially at this time of ideological division, conflict, and war, that effective dialogue must in no way compromise our own deepest convictions, but rather it's a way to bring those convictions into encounter with those of others, to listen, to learn, and to identify, wherever possible, points of contact and bases for cooperation. The China Forum for Civilizational Dialogue is in line with this, our overall philosophy, an effort, as you've heard, to address shared concerns at the intersection of culture, ethics, and global society. And today I'm delighted we're introducing a new topic into the dialogue, the idea of cosmopolitanism, with a particular focus on its different resonances and emphases within the Confucian and Catholic traditions. We're very, very fortunate to have a panel of leading scholars to help us in this effort. And I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, PJ Ivanhoe, a leading expert in the field, who will be introducing the panel and moderating our discussion. PJ serves as professor and chair of the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures here at Georgetown. He's a leading historian of Chinese thought, particularly Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, and the author and editor of many influential works, and I'll just name a couple here. Oneness, East Asian Conceptions of Virtue, Happiness, and How We Are All Connected, and a volume especially relevant to today's discussion entitled Confucianism and Catholicism, Reinvigorating the Dialogue. PJ also co-leads a US-China research group on cosmopolitanism based here at Georgetown. So PJ, thanks so much for hosting our panel today, and I'm very happy to turn things over to you.
Well, thank you, Father Spadaro and Vice President Banchoff, for organizing this session and introducing this event as part of the China Forum for Civilizational Dialogue. I very much look forward to the presentation by our panelists and the conversations that are going to follow. Right now, I'd like to just very briefly introduce my my co-panelists, beginning with Father Anthony Usler, who is Director and Provost Fellow of the Ricci Institute for Chinese Western Cultural History at Boston College. His main research and teaching interests include Japanese samurai history, the era of European maritime empires, and expansion into Asia, and the history of Christianity in Japan and China. Sunxiang Chen is Professor and Dean in the School of Philosophy at Fudan University, Shanghai. His many fields of study include early modern philosophy, Enlightenment philosophy, political philosophy, Jewish Christian philosophy, phenomenology, and comparative philosophy. Mei Sim is Professor and Director of the Asian Studies Program at the College of the Holy Cross, Her focus is primarily in ancient philosophy, particularly Plato and Aristotle, and Asian philosophy with a focus on Confucianism and Taoism. In terms of themes, she focuses on ethics, metaphysics, and the issues of human rights. Now, this meeting of the China Forum, as has been mentioned, focuses on the concept of cosmopolitanism, which we all feel is particularly timely given our deeply divided and contentious world. Our goal today is modest, I think, to begin a conversation about different conceptions of cosmopolitanism that might contribute to dialogue and encounter in this divided world. As Vice President Banchoff mentioned, we also have a research group on cosmopolitanism here at Georgetown, and I've added that link to the chat for those of you who are interested. Now, in the time allotted to me, I'm going to kind of run through three basic conceptions of cosmopolitanism that are influential among contemporary Western philosophers. The first takes cosmopolitanism as a moral view or theory about human beings. The second as a view about oneself and one's stance toward the world. And the third sees it as a political theory. So for the first conception, if you looked at Martha Nussbaum's early writings on cosmopolitanism, you'd see a perfect representation. She presents a contemporary Western liberal view of cosmopolitanism, crafted on Kantian principles about the moral status and dignity of persons as rational moral agents. While our account offers a powerful statement of this important moral point of view, it is, as pointed out by a number of critics, it also faces certain challenges as a prescription for how to navigate our global multicultural world. As several people have pointed out, human beings don't live in and cannot live in the thin air of a deracinated abstract conception of the world or persons that are shorn of every vestige of history and culture. Human beings, in fact, inhabit ongoing traditions with particular features and unique histories, and they work out the course their lives are taking within such thick and textured contexts of meaning. Nussbaum's view tends to ignore these features of the human good and seems strongly inclined to encourage and perhaps require a high degree of homogeneity in the world's cultures. Nevertheless, such a view informs a number of very important practical attempts at implementing cosmopolitanism in the world. For example, it's the view that's expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was adopted in 1948 by the United Nations General Assembly. And it's, of course, a view that underlies and is thought to justify an effort to ensure that all people enjoy a particular conception of dignity. The second conception of cosmopolitanism understands it as an ideal view about oneself and one's stance toward other cultures and people. Such a conception is described beautifully by Kwame Anthony Appiah in his recent book, Cosmopolitanism: Ethics in a World of Strangers. In that book, Appiah seeks to describe how one can live as what he calls a grounded cosmopolitanism, someone who embraces and remains committed to a home tradition or culture while working to understand and appreciate a range of other views in the wider world. Such an understanding offers a second important way to conceive of cosmopolitanism, and one that doesn't seem to entail the imposition of one culture's values upon another, though it does express a particular conception, a normative conception of how one views both oneself and the world. The third conception of cosmopolitanism is a political philosophy about what nation states owe one another. And again, here the representative I will use is Martha Nussbaum in her more recent book called The Cosmopolitan Tradition, A Noble but Flawed Idea. In this work, she describes a Stoic tradition of philosophy inspired by this very famous quote attributed to Diogenes of Sinope about being a citizen of the world. But she focuses on the bifurcation in this view between, on the one hand, a particular conception of justice, and on the other, the material needs, the physical needs needed to have, to enjoy human flourishing. And the flaw that she identifies is the clear, bright line that the tradition has tended to draw between these two aspects of the human good. Now, each of these, I think, contributes in significant ways to more adequate understanding of our global nature of our modern world and the moral demands it imposes on us. I'm not here to advocate or criticize any one of these, but to just present them as avenues into a larger conversation about cosmopolitanism. And as part of that conversation, I'd like to in my time remaining, sketch briefly 3 other views you might have that again are stances about, or views about oneself and one's stance toward other cultures and people. But these 3 views are ideas that I've developed by my study of the Confucian tradition. The first is a passage related to ideas found in the Analects of Confucius and involves seeing the cosmopolitan as a special kind of guest who's curious about and comfortable around the world. Now, such a guest isn't a tourist. A cosmopolitan is not just passing through or merely observing people and other cultures for interest or pleasure, not the National Geographic view of other cultures kind of. Rather, they're seeking to understand and appreciate and learn from other people and places. Such a guest is not a cultural equivalent of a speaker of Esperanto, but rather a multilingual traveler who seeks to know and takes the effort to know and appreciate the special characteristics and tenor of different natural languages and cultures, and how each offers distinctive insights into our shared humanity. As a second conception, cosmopolitanism can be thought of as an attitude of seeing other people as part of one's family. For those who are familiar with Confucianism, this should be a familiar idea because Confucians see care as arising in the family and needing to be extended out from there. Now, at first, this may seem like too demanding, surely more demanding than the guest conception I've described, because it seems like we're supposed to love strangers as much as we love the members of our family. But Confucians have always insisted on a lessening of emotional commitment as you move further and further away from the center of the family. I think the way to think about this is that we should think and feel for other people on the analogy of how we feel about family members. And if we do this, we will have a tendency not only to tolerate difference, but more, perhaps often we'll come to accept, even perhaps welcome and learn from it. My third and final suggestion is that cosmopolitan could be based on the idea of forming one body with all people, creatures, and things. This is an idea seen in many Chinese thinkers, but most often associated with the philosophy of Wang Yangming. The idea is that we're supposed to see ourselves as parts of or identical with all other people, creatures, and things. And this metaphysical unity is thought to generate a greater sense of care. We would care for the rest of the world as we care for ourselves. As Vice President Banchoff has noted, I and other people have written on the notion of oneness that's inspired by this East Asian ideal. And I believe properly crafted, it offers another interesting and potentially productive conception of cosmopolitanism. So I've introduced 3 conceptions of cosmopolitanism represented within contemporary Western philosophy, and I went on to describe 3 possible alternatives inspired by the Confucian tradition. My hope is, I know I went through a lot here, but the idea is to try to generate more avenues into cosmopolitanism. And I believe that will be continued both by my fellow panelists and in our conversation. And I thank you and turn it now over to Father Usseler.
Thank you very much. Well, we've just heard quite an introduction, which makes it difficult to be the first panelist, actually. But I begin by asking the question, well, what's in a word? As Professor Ivanhoe just pointed out, words are important, but they are also by nature ambiguous and in need of interpretation. And as we've seen in English, cosmopolitanism can evoke a number of different connotations. And on a more popular side, a negative side perhaps, some would say that it denotes a type of privileged elitism, an experience of different countries and cultures that comes from a position of wealth and the ability to live in a life that allows for travel, ownership of property, and freedom to invest resources to maximize one's own profits and to enhance one's own life. But as was just quoted in Western political and cultural theory, including the writings of Kwame Anthony Appiah, it has come to designate an enlightened worldview that allows for a genuine respect of differing views and abiding tolerance for other religions, cultures, worldviews, and even socioeconomic and geopolitical environments. This leads Appiah to speak of actively striving to be a citizen of the world rather than of one country alone. Otherwise, we run perhaps the risk of talking about diversity, pluralism, and tolerance as functions of cosmopolitanism, in a way that deprives them of any real meaning. We must avoid a simplistic laissez-faire, laissez-vivre attitude. Appiah argues for something much more than simply a passive tolerance of the other, a policy of non-interference on condition that the other party not interfere with our own affairs. In other words, it is not about protecting our parallel political, economic, and social silos, thereby avoiding the need to engage with and express solidarity towards others. Time and again, we've seen the failure of international relations founded on the political principle, don't bother me and I won't bother you. Our world has time and again revealed itself and continues to reveal itself, more perhaps than at any other time in history, as a nexus of interdependent relationships that span the whole world. The environmental crisis the entire globe is facing is one clear example of this truism. The inextricable economic ties that link the world and those that, for example, bind China together with the rest of the world cannot be ignored. And we cannot simply allow for a superficial parallel silo mentality. In a very recent article in the New York Times, David Brooks speaks of the end of globalization. There's a real and present danger that countries envision globalization as a worldwide extension of their local, national, economic, and political interests. A worldview built upon the foundation of narrow self-interest and profit alone seems destined for failure, especially when and where the interests of nation states or ethnic and religious groups inevitably collide with each other. When this happens, more often than not, war is the result. I find it hard to have this conversation today without referring to what is going on in Ukraine at this moment, when one powerful nation has unilaterally decided to determine the fate of another by employing violence to further its interests. When in the opening lines of the book, King Hui of Liang asks Mencius, Mengzi, how his wisdom and teaching can profit his state, Mengzi throws the question back at him and asks, why must he speak of profit, li? For the only thing that counts is humaneness and righteousness, zhenyi. In Confucian thought, what strikes me is that what underpinned Kungzi's intellectual endeavor was the conscious effort to overcome strife, conflict, and injustice in society, all the way from ruler down to peasant. Mengzi strove to express and develop the ideas of Master Kung, not unlike the way Plato strove to do the same, shocked by the fate that befell his teacher Socrates. At a time when one had reason to doubt humanity, Mengzi's conclusion that human nature is fundamentally good was based upon his famous thought experiments. What person, he asks, would not instinctively, innately, from his or her nature, not react and try to save a child who was about to fall into a well, even with no familial ties to that child? Quote, all humans have hearts that are not unfeeling towards others, unquote. From this and many other examples, Mengzi believed that there was a common humanity based on a heart of compassion, 恻隐之心, which was the origin, or to quote Mengzi's agricultural metaphor, the sprout of benevolence, 生之端也. If human beings could cultivate this, they could become superior human beings, 君子, and through benevolence, 仁, justice would be achieved. This reminds me of yet another tradition, the rabbinic saying from the Jewish Talmud, to save one life is to save the world. For one act represents humanity and humaneness, or the lack thereof. I would argue that Mengzi's theory of human nature forms the basis for a universal view of humankind. We all share an innate ability to cultivate the good and potentially become righteous. The Chinese philosopher Mozi speaks of impartial love, 兼爱, whereby all human beings must strive not to discriminate in their relationships. And this was alluded to in part by Professor Ivanhoe's remarks. In contemporary terms, he posits the need for equality among all, a radical communitarianism. In the West, this finds a slightly different expression through utilitarianism, the idea that society must pursue the greatest good for the greatest number of people. When Matteo Ricci entered into dialogue with his Confucian interlocutors in the 16th century, he attempted to reinterpret the tradition by equating the concept of heaven, tian, with what he referred to as the original Confucian idea of a personal deity or Lord of Heaven, first Shangdi and then Tianzhu. By doing so, he was bringing his Christian theological worldview to China and claiming that all human beings were children of God, a divine Lord present in all cultures, whose teachings were thus also present in Chinese culture, just like sprouts, to use Mencius's metaphor, and not unlike St. Paul preaching about the unknown God of the Greeks on the Areopagus in Athens. This vision was based on his reading of the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles, as well as the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola and the meditation of the Incarnation, wherein Ignatius invites us to imagine the divine Trinity looking down upon the entire world and all of its inhabitants and on every culture, all of which God wishes to save without distinction. One of the most important Jesuits of the first generation was Jerónimo Nadal, who, when referring to the work of the Society of Jesus, coined the famous phrase, "The world is our home." As a result, Jesuits embark on missions, journeys, literally peregrinations, peregrinaciones, wherever there is a need to do so. In other words, the Jesuit worldview is firmly rooted in a theological anthropology that firmly believes in a universal brotherhood and sisterhood of all humankind, sons and daughters of the same divine presence, hence equal and called to mutual solidarity. Ricci and his successors realized that this resonated with Confucian ideas of humaneness, righteousness, and propriety in human relations. Ricci's most popular and enduring work, quoted earlier by Father Spadaro, on friendship, De Amicizia, the Jiaoyou Lun, in which he translated 100 maxims on friendship inspired by the Greek and Roman classics. In the end, he acknowledges that differences and conflicts, even among friends, may arise. In maxim number 19, he says, "A true and upright friend does not always follow a friend, nor does he or she always oppose a friend. When that person is reasonable, he follows. When that person is unreasonable, she opposes him. The only responsibility of a true friend is to speak frankly." Hence, in Ricci's view, to seek the truth implies that there is such a thing as truth and goodness, falsehood and evil. The Greeks will define the essential properties of being, or the transcendentals, as one, beautiful, good, and true. To sum up, to be cosmopolitan, a member of the polis, or of the commonwealth, goes hand in hand with our participation in the cosmos, or the world beyond our borders and our self-interested pursuits. "Why do you speak of profit?" Mengzi says to King Huiliang. Ricci knew that the whole world is our home, and in that world, as he read in Mengzi, we should not only speak of profit, but only of humanity and righteousness. In the midst of the horrors of war playing out before our eyes, we see complete strangers in Poland, and I'm half Polish, so this is very close to my heart, and elsewhere throughout Europe and beyond its borders, taking in Ukrainian refugees by the millions into their homes in order to save them and care for them. I believe both Mengzi and Mozi, and also Ricci, would have all approved of such a way of conceiving cosmopolitanism. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Father Anthony, for that elegant and inspiring talk. I'd now like to turn it over to Professor Sun.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I'm very happy to accept your invitation to participate in this forum. Actually, it's my first time to participate in this forum. I think it's a very interesting topic, especially in such a era of such anti-globalization and divided world. And I think it's hard to discuss such a topic. But it's very interesting and still very challenging. And this topic, I will introduce the Chinese version of the cosmopolitanism. We call it 天下, or translated into the English as the earth and heaven. So I just want to introduce such a concept and want to know, is there any meaningful in such in this modern time? And I think we can discuss this concept in on the 3 levels. One is the historical level, and the second is the theoretical level. We want to know the logical structure beyond this ancient concept. And the third one is what is the meaning in this contemporary world? Is there any meaningful? From the historical perspective, I think in China we have a very rich, very rich the thought, the resources of this concept, earth and heaven. It's not only an idea, or it's not only an ideology, because for the Zhou dynasty, 1,000 years before the Christ, Confucianism regarded the Zhou dynasty as an ideal one, and I regarded their institute as an ideal institute. And for them, I think it's a very special. It's a very special situation for them, because they are at the very beginning, it's a very small state, and they threw away the Song dynasty, and then they governance the whole China, and they regard the whole China as the Tianxia, as the earth and heaven. So it's for them, it's not idea. It's a big challenge. They have to govern such a huge country. So in this sense, the earth heaven is have a very special standpoint. It's not to begin with the idea, not to begin with ideology. It's a practical challenge. So I think this is a very interesting event. And in China, of course, this concept have a different meaning in different time, but the beginning is totally different, I think. And then they have a framework for their worldview, and of course, with the historical condition, they regarded East Asia as the whole world, and they regarded so the China. If we translate into Chinese is the Central Kingdom. So China, Central Kingdom, and the earth and heaven. This is a whole framework for them to understand the whole world. And I think the Confucians also accept such an idea and regard this one as an ideal one. And but of course there are many problems. It's egocentrism, but it's not the racist race system. It's a culture centrism. And it's very interesting. And in the China, and they regarded the surrounding civilization are decreasing in degree, and the China is the center. And of course, it's a very strong egocentrism. But it's also interesting, because they think if the surrounding area is more cultivated, they can call themselves the Central Kingdom, because of this theory. So the Japanese, they regard they refuse to call China the Central Kingdom in the modern time, because for the Japanese, they think them are the Central Kingdom. And of course, in the history, it formed empirical tributary system. It's a very strong hierarchy system. So in the modern time, China threw out this idea and accepted the nation state, and they regarded the Chinese as a nation. But you know, it's an alien one. It's for the Chinese, it's not very familiar with such a nation. They just regarded themselves as a cultivated one. It's not a nation. It's not a race. It's just educated one. So I think this concept of the Tianxia has its own characteristics, and in recent years, Chinese scholars and more and more Chinese scholars and they revive this concept. You know, to revive it, I think the representative of these scholars are the Professor Zhao Tingyang in Beijing. He published his book "Earth and Heaven" in the University of California Press. I think it's a very complex theory, but I think it's interesting. So now in China, Chinese intellectual circle, more and more scholars to discuss this topic. I think it's a revival of the Chinese version of the cosmopolitanism. And if we, you know, on the level of philosophical level, on the theoretical level, how to understand this concept, I think there are three characters. One is it's a concept of hope. It's all all inclusiveness. We call it no outside. Not like the international society, or you know, they judge people always as the other, and everything, and heaven, and including everything, and no outside. This is a very important meaning, especially in this time, in this global area. The global times. So I think not as the what is my friend with my enemy, everyone is the within this or the under this heaven. We also call it that whole human beings are within one family. So I think this is a very important view. And according to the Lao Tzu, he said we should regard or view the world in terms of the world. We view the state in terms of the state. We view the family in terms of the family, and view the individual in terms of the individual. So it's different levels. We cannot to understand or to build the world, the whole world in terms of the state. This is, I think, the big problems in the contemporary world. We just, you know, regard our own state interest as the highest value, and forgot the, you know, the whole human being as a family. I think the earth and heaven, it's give us a holistic dimension of this concept. And the second one, I think this earth and heaven is a virtuous concept. It's not a political one. It's not only we persuade of our interest, but it's also it's a virtuous concept, because you know in the contemporary modern time we just develop of moral sense within the individual, and just to cultivate our moral sense as an individual. But according to this concept, we regarded the whole human being as a moral one, as a virtuous one. So I think this is also is a very important point for this concept. And of course, there are many psychologists that can give some argument, according to the Mengzi or Confucius. They say we must give control, must conquer or must govern every whole human beings by virtue, not by the force or the stress. And the third one is that we also call it the 和而不同. Someone translated as the harmony but difference, but some scholar translated the 和 as the compatibility, and the 文 the 同 as the uniformity. I think this one is also very important. It's not like the Huntington say, it's the conflict or the struggle between among the different civilizations. But according to the O and the heaven, every civilization can live peace among each other. This is very important because according to the Thomas Hobbes, every individual, everyone against everyone. This is the nature state. And then according to the Kant, maybe for the state, it's also the every nation against every nation. But according to the Huntington, every civilization against every civilization. But according to the concept of the O and the heaven, maybe we can have such an idea, harmony but difference, or the compatibility, we not the uniformity. So this is the pardon.
We need to wrap up soon, Professor. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And so this is just according to the ancient one or the classical concept of the Tianxia. But if we, talk about this concept in this contemporary world, what is meaning and what is the significance in such a divided world? I think there also have three principles. We need some modern transformation of this concept. The first one is according to the ancient one, China as a central kingdom, and then the surrounding area is Barbara, or it's decreasing in degree in the civilization, but now it's a global world. There are many different civilizations. So in this sense, we need a shared world. It's not just one center and the whole world around you. We need this is a shared world by the whole human beings. So the second one is not just one center. There are many multiple civilizations. So we need a new version of the Tianxia, new version of the O and the heaven. So that means we include different civilizations within one world. And the third level. Okay, the third level is the concept of the O and the heaven, not care about the individual, especially in the Asian China. We have there is no such a concept of the individual. So
the best care unit is the family. So family is just like Antonio said, so the family is very, very important in Chinese culture, and PJ said it's very important. It's a pattern for us to understand the whole world. It's not an individual, it's just the family. But in the contemporary world, the dignity of the individual is very important. So the human rights is the bottom line of the modern civilization. So if we want to create a new version of the concept of the earth and heaven, the human rights, or the to respect everyone, to respect individuals, their liberty, their the rights and the dignity is very important. But I don't think that the ancient one have such dimension, to respect the individual one.
Professor Sun, I'm going to have to ask you to stop, to pause here so that we can get to the next speaker and have some time for conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Just 2 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay. So we needed to.
We need to move on to Mei Sim. Thank you very much for your.
Okay.
Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Sim.
I'm going to tap the Stoics and Confucians on this topic of cosmopolitanism. And the thinkers I'll be dealing with in this talk are Epictetus, Confucius, and Mencius. Epictetus claims that it's more appropriate to call ourselves citizens of the universe rather than Athenians. And it is because we are rational beings who are bound to God through reason. God being our maker and protector is so much more powerful with whom to ally ourselves than a ruler such as Caesar. And Confucius, while responding to the charge that he avoids certain people, says, quote, "We cannot run with the birds and beasts. Am I not one among the people of the world?" So I trace the cosmopolitanism in Epictetus and the Confucians to their respective accounts of human nature. For Epictetus, we are rational beings who share in God's reason. And for the Confucians, we are human beings who are governed by the Tao. Both Stoics and Confucians are concerned with the perfection of character, in perfecting our virtues such as wisdom and truthfulness, which are bound up with happiness. And we all know that these are values that Jesuits share. They also are concerned with the cultivation and how cultivation relies on having the appropriate role models. So it will be Socrates for Epictetus and a Qunzi, an exemplary individual, or the sage for the Confucians. They both subscribe to their respective norms of morality. This is God's reason for Epictetus and the Tao for Confucius. Specifically, Epictetus says that God creates everything according to reason, so that when human beings follow reason, we are also following the will of nature or the law of nature. According to Mencius, quoting the Odes, he says, if there is a thing, there is a norm. And the Tao dictates this norm of human nature, and that being goodness. So Mencius's view of human nature is that it's made up equally of four feelings: the feeling of compassion, the feeling of shame or disdain toward wrong actions, reverence toward our parents and elders, and also the approval of what is right and the disapproval of what is wrong. And when perfected, these feelings become the respective virtues of benevolence or humaneness, Zhen, righteousness, Yi, ritual propriety, Li, or wisdom, Zhi. So human nature, according to Mencius, is already good or inclines us toward the good. As already quoted by Father Anthony, all humans have hearts that are not unfeeling toward others. When it comes to Epictetus, human nature consists of doing things in our power. So for Epictetus, our human nature consists in doing things that are in our power and avoiding those not in our power. Things not in our power consist of our bodies, possessions, roles, and so forth. Now, do you see the next slide, PJ? Okay. And so when it comes to things that are internal to us, it is anything that is within the power of the will. And this is also to desire things according to natural rule or law. And examples of such things are our own thoughts, judgment, virtues, desires, attitudes, and so forth. Now, comparing Epictetus and Mencius, they seem to be similar in their views of human nature because there seems to be this division between what's internal and what's external, but they are really different because when it comes to the internal as opposed to the external for Epictetus, it tracks a division between reality and appearances so that it's only the internal that is real and controllable according to Epictetus. Whereas for Mencius, both our internal sprouts and the external world are real and controllable. For Epictetus, then, everything that happens is independent of our will. So for instance, if we were to be attacked by lions, boars, or batmen, and eventually die, it's beyond our control. However, how you act is dependent on your will, and it is up to you to accord with God's laws. So in short, Epictetus doesn't believe that we can change someone else or the world, whereas the Confucians believe that we can influence how others behave. We can serve heaven by completing the 1 or the 10,000 things, and we also have power over our own virtues or vices. So Mencius, for instance, believes that rulers can win over the people and the world by just acting virtuously. Now, their differences in views of human nature also map onto their differences with respect to cultivation. So for Epictetus, when cultivating our virtues, we exclude others. One is actually self-sufficient and one just needs to focus on his own reason. And for the Confucians, in contrast, cultivation includes others. We are socially dependent on others. So the focus is not only on the self, but also our relationships as well as the world. So an example of their views of what's possible or impossible to change is this. According to Epictetus, while dealing with an abusive father, we cannot change him. So what we should do is to continue our duties toward him, to care for him, and to yield to the abuse and simply change our own attitudes and thoughts about ourselves and pursuing what's virtuous by doing our duties. Now, Confucius believes that we ought to remonstrate with our parents if they're not acting correctly. So he believes that we can change them. So for the Confucians, they believe in the capacity of transforming both oneself as well as others. And their differences boil down to one of reason as opposed to customs. So when cultivating virtue for Epictetus, he believes that one's focus is one's reason, and that's something one could change. And the model is upon God's perfect reason. That's the norm for him. When it comes to the external world, it's merely a trigger of our virtues. It tells us what virtues to exercise at different times and situations, but we don't inspire virtue in others. We can't change them and make them better. For the Confucians, the Li or customs that enable us to cultivate ourselves are from the society, and apart from changing ourselves, when we become virtuous, we can also inspire others. Moreover, he believes, the Confucians believe that we can change the Li with changing situations. So considering their respective resources and liabilities for cosmopolitanism, we could ask if Epictetus's self-sufficiency in perfecting oneself is more conducive to cosmopolitanism, in that you are not dependent on the specific communal requirements, the specific social, political, and cultural conditions that the Confucians require. Or we could ask if Epictetus's focus on the self is too egocentric to encompass duties toward the world. Whereas for the Confucians, since they're already communally oriented, is it easier to extend their virtues to the rest of the world? And ultimately, I trace their differences to their invariability or variability with respect to the first principle or the source. So for Epictetus, God is always present as our advisors, and the world is set up like a target so that nothing bad happens by nature. But for the Confucians, they believe that it is possible for the Tao not to prevail in the world. Both Confucius and Mencius talk about corrupt governments, and Confucius tells us that it is the person who can broaden the way. Now, I want to focus on just one virtue to illustrate their differences. So when it comes to Epictetus, he says the following, quote, "Be silent for the most part, speak rarely. If it is about people, talk without blaming or praising or comparing." So what he's expressing seems to be tolerant for falsehood in others, since there's nothing that we can do to change someone else's character. But Confucius says if what one has to say is not good and no one takes exception, is this not clearly a kind of saying that ruins a state? So what he means then is that you must speak up if you are in the face of falsehood. And likewise, scholars need to be demanding with their friends when it comes to speaking the truth. And once again, with respect to their resources and liabilities for cosmopolitanism, Epictetus's tolerance of what's happening in the external world could lead us to ask if, well, is his view then more conducive to pluralism and hence cosmopolitanism, in that he's not trying to get everyone to conform to a particular way of behavior. But we could also ask if it's a liability in that what he's encouraging then is a kind of passivity toward vices. When it comes to the Confucians, we notice that they subscribe to the traditional rituals, Li, and this seems to be a challenge for outsiders who don't also subscribe to the same rituals, and hence a challenge for pluralism. Alternatively, we could ask if the highest Confucian virtue of Zhen, of extending the love that we have for the family gradually to the rest of the world, a solution so that they are able to move from the local to the global. And I just want to end with a gesture toward human rights. And my view of human rights is that they offer us the conditions for the cultivation of virtues. And so it's relevant going forward to ask, to which of these traditions, the Stoics or the Confucians, would such an account of human rights be more appropriate as a resource for cosmopolitanism? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sim. It's always great to hear someone who has deep knowledge of both the early Greek and early Chinese traditions doing this kind of comparison. So we're supposed to have 20 minutes, but we really have about 8 because we're running late. So I would like to propose a way to move forward, and that would preserve our last 20 minutes for questions from our audience, which I'd like to do. And that is, if I could ask each of the 3 other panelists to take 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes. Professor Sim just said that the Junzi or wannabe Junzi is demanding of their friends, and I will be demanding about the time. So if I could ask each of you in 2 minutes to say if any ideas that you have based on what you've given us about what people could do politically, institutionally, or personally to move toward the goals that you described. I think we all agree we need more cosmopolitanism, but what can we do to actually achieve those goals rather than simply analyze them? So Father, may I start with you? And
Yes, it's so basically you want cosmopolitanism, you want world peace, you want everything. And how am I supposed to solve this problem in 2 minutes?
or just take a few steps, you know. Yeah.
Well, again, if you don't mind me going back to the war in Ukraine, one of the things that I have been very personally touched by, as I say, is this opening of homes. More than 2 million people have entered Poland, and this has increased the Polish population by 5% in 3 weeks. So it would be the equivalent of the US accepting 16 million people. And there have been in the past conflicts and even situation of killing each other between Poles and Ukrainians. Lviv was part of Poland during part of its history, but that was all put aside in the name of solidarity and mutual help. And as I was listening, I was reminded of the famous saying from the Analects, that all men and women are brothers and sisters, the Sihai Zhernei, Jie Xiongdi. So, everyone really must be an older brother, and a younger brother, older sister, younger sister, for everyone. And when we see this, I think it gives us hope that in fact it is possible. So I think humanity, humaneness, a universal outlook, practically speaking, means solidarity. So for me, that is the key word. I think humanity and all of these theories, they come together when people decide to open their hearts to other people. So that's my first take.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Sun, could you give us a couple of thoughts on ways we can move forward? Practical.
Thank you. Yeah. I think Chinese culture give a different starting point, and it's not only to respect the individual, but also respect the family. The family is in Chinese thought, it's not like a Plato's dual world. It's not well, first we have a principle, then we pursue this principle. but the Dao is just begin with yourself or with the it's your just begin from the couple or your family. So if you respect your family member and you have the piety, in your family, then extend it. So the big problem is how to extend it and what is the limit of the extended intention. But it's still very important. This benevolence, the piety, and not only respect your own parents, your own family member, but also the other parents and the family member. I think this is the special. It's the Chinese way, to promote this idea and to realize it.
Okay, 谢谢孙教授. That's very helpful. Thank you. Professor Sim, could you give us a few thoughts on how to move forward?
Well, I will begin with where I ended, and it's also what you have alluded to in your talk about the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think that that is a resource in that, and combined with the virtues, in that it will secure for human beings around the world the relevant basic conditions, not only for living, but for living well, so that you not only have the material conditions, but also the education, the cultural, and everything that conduces to one's ability to cultivate the virtues. And the question is, how do we implement these rights? I think that it's something that is shared sufficiently by different traditions, Western as well as Eastern. And I believe that if we want to do something that is practical now, this is a resource from which we can start.
Okay, great, thanks. I think we've heard a lot of different new ideas about how we can conceive of and maybe move forward. I'd like to just add one small one and then turn to our audience for some questions. And that is, we're all in institutions of higher learning. And I think one of the things that is done at such places, one of the reasons I value such institutions, is that they provide students the chance to learn about, in a deep and textured way, other cultures. And myself, I think we need to actually make that more of an imperative in the university. And that's not just for self-centered reasons, I hope, but it's just that when you come to really understand another way of life, you don't need to then, in some ways, justify it as good. You'll see what's good about it if you come to understand it. So anyhow, that's another way we might move forward, is to advocate for more multicultural, and by that I mean the deep study of other cultures education. Now, in the time remaining, we do have exactly 20 minutes. I'm supposed to be getting ideas from the, and I see some in the chat room, I think. I see. Question from Professor Gabjian from the Philippines. I'm not sure who these, let's see. There's a bunch of them, so I'll just take one. Years back, the former PM Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore said that the success of his country's leap as an Asian economic tiger was due to the Confucian principles. Do you think that other developing Asian nations could benefit from Singaporean application? I have to give this question first to Professor Sim, because she is from Singapore originally and has a lot more knowledge of that. What do you think about that?
Well, the problem is that it didn't work in Singapore when Lee Kuan Yew implemented that program. And one of the reasons why it didn't work was because of the multicultural population in Singapore, and that the other cultures were opposed to subscribing universally to Confucian culture. But nevertheless, I think that the way that it was done wasn't appropriate, in that it didn't respect the other cultures sufficiently. But if he had done it more differently and focused more on the universal values of the virtues and perhaps what is shared amongst the different cultures, so make it more multicultural, it would have worked better. And likewise, for the rest of the world and cultures, I think that it might help if we were to focus on the shared values and virtues that we can all agree with.
Right, yeah. I might also add that if you're looking for economic development in East Asia, you really don't have to wait. The second, third, and 10th largest economies are all in East Asia. So they're doing okay already. Yes, I want to remind the audience they can submit questions using the Q&A function. And then I'd like to turn to my second question for Father Usler. So the question is, what is the status of cosmopolitanism in Catholic social teaching today?
Yes, I think that I would say about this that the idea, of course, of the Roman Catholic Church is that it is Catholic, therefore universal. And this, of course, causes problems because some people say that, you know, you shouldn't, again, interfere in things that are not, that don't have to do with you. But the basic inspiration of Roman Catholic social teaching is that we are, in fact, in solidarity with all our brothers and sisters all across the world. And so it's sort of, I would say, almost something that doesn't need to be put into a silo and say, this is our teaching on this, because I would say the entire social teaching really is built on this premise of universal solidarity. That's a very quick answer, but.
Okay, thanks. The next question is for Professor Sun. Here's your question. Do you see liberal arts education in Fudan as a way to promote the idea of cosmopolitanism? And do you think liberal arts education will be accepted broadly in the future of Chinese higher education?
Thank you. It's a good question. You know, and just in recent maybe 15 years, you know, in Chinese higher education, there were movement, you know, for the general education or the liberal education, you know, introduced to the Chinese university. And because they think of the higher education is not only for their, you know, for to learn the knowledge, but also it's a cultivation, you know, of the human being to learn to be a human. So that is this is also, I think, it's a Chinese tradition. So many universities accept it, and I think it's still a moment in Chinese university. So in China, the liberal education is not only, you know, learned from the United States, such as the Boston College, and also, you know, they have some. All students study the Chinese ancient classicals. So I think it's a play a good it's an important role, you know, to promotion of the cosmopolitanism. Yeah. So it's just very important for them to have a view of the whole world.
Okay, thank you. We have a general question. How can we agree on cosmopolitanism given such different ideas about human rights around the world? Maybe I'll say a word and then I'll ask Professor Sim to follow up because and then anyone can chime in. So my first thing would be to say, I hope we don't have to agree before we move forward, and that we may have, part of what I thought we were doing today is to say, there are multiple conceptions of cosmopolitanism that will help us build bridges and come to greater understanding of one another as individuals and as cultures, and that I don't see why we can't pursue all of these at the same time. And so I don't want to wait for having to come to a consensus on what the word means in order to pick up various senses of it and trying to move forward. But anyhow, maybe Professor Sim could add to that since you've done so much work on human rights, but then I asked the other two participants to join in as well.
I agree with the questioner about the contextual nature and the particularities from which the requirement for human rights arise. Nevertheless, what is common to all of these cries for human rights is really the vulnerabilities of human beings, the very fact that we need certain conditions and necessities in order to survive and flourish. So unless those conditions for human flourishing are being impinged upon, one wouldn't be asking for certain rights. So I think that moving forward, it's not so much that we have to agree on every single right that we are going to grant to everyone in the world, but rather it's dependent on the specific conditions and needs of specific peoples.
Thank you. So we have a question from Professor Sun's colleague, Professor Bai Tongdong at Fudan University. And as is his wont, he has asked not one question, but two, which the first one for Father Usler. He says, there's another side of the claim in the Analects that we're all brothers, and that is there's a hierarchy of care. Maybe the fact that Poland has taken so many Ukrainians, when seen from a Confucian point of view, this might reflect the ethnic affinity between Ukrainians and Poles and the shared fear and even hatred toward Russia. I don't know how much of that you'd like to take on, but if you'd like to comment.
All of that to a certain degree is true. So, I think that there is no point in trying to say that, we live in an ideal world where everybody is always, unreflectingly generous towards everybody else. We're not in a perfect world. And it's true that it sometimes is easier to be generous and also to be helpful when there is some perceived common need, there's some perceived common affinity, and there, in this case also, there is a common fear in many ways. But the element I do want to stress, which is I think interesting, is the fact that Ukraine and Poland have not always been friends. I think this is an important thing. There's ethnic affinity, but you could also talk about a certain ethnic affinity within Asia between Japan and Korea, but they're not friends. And so that this goes in different or can go in quite different directions. So yes, we live in an imperfect world, but I think that when people, even with such, you could say, preconditions, manage to overcome, let's say, past enmity or past suspicion, I think it's one step forward. And I just want to add one last thing here, which I totally agree with Professor Ivanhoe, talking about small steps forward is the multicultural education and multilingual education is, I think, something that we can really use as a tool of taking that first or second or third step. I've seen people's lives transformed by their experience of going abroad and of learning something about, for example, from the West, going to China or to Japan or to Korea. So I think this is a very important concrete contribution.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I would just add that that's, of course, one of the characteristic features of so much work by the Jesuits to go to other countries and get these very thick, deep, linguistically mature understandings of other cultures and help us understand. The other question goes to Professor Sim from Professor Pai. What about Hierocles, who has the idea of concentric circles? Is he as individualistic as Epictetus and more Confucian in this sense? Interestingly, Confucians never used that in the classical period, that metaphor. It's used in ancient Greece. Anyhow, the question to you.
Could you please repeat to whom is he referring?
Well, there's a man named Hierocles, Hierocles, who had the view, he's the only person actually I know in the ancient world who talked about care being based on concentric circles. Lots of people who talk about Confucianism use this metaphor, but no Confucian does during the classical period. So, yeah.
Right. And the thing is that it is possible to think about it in terms of expanding concentric circles if you were to consider the talk of extension, the extension of the love, right, from the family gradually in a graduated manner toward strangers. So I don't think that that's incompatible with Confucianism.
So I think the name is Heraclitus, Heraclitus. Yeah.
All right, but if it is Heraclitus, then what he champions is
what he wrote, but okay.
Flux, yeah, right? Everything is in change, but nevertheless, what he also emphasizes is the one eternal logos that governs everything that is in flux. And gosh, if you want me to compare that to the Confucians, I would say that it's the Tao that is able to accommodate, and be the constant in the face of change and flux. That ultimately, that is the way toward the virtues.
Yeah, just for the record, it is Hierocles, not, he's a Stoic thinker, not Heraclitus. Is that?
All right.
Yeah. So Professor Sun, I think you need to put on your oven mitts for this question. Okay, it comes from Professor Ellen Zhang at Hong Kong Baptist University. And she asks, how do you see the strong sense of nationalism or even hyper-nationalism in China today that may be in conflict with cosmopolitanism?
It's a challenge, yeah. And it's, of course, it's the phenomenon in China, and it's a very strong nationalism in China. But I think it's just one stage, towards the cosmopolitanism. That's the one stage. If we want to understand China, we need to know that how to say that the general difference, of the modern civilization. Sometimes we understand China, we should, from the perspective of the 17th century. Sometimes you understand it from the 19th century. So in this sense, it's easy to understand, the nationalism in China. But I do believe we will move towards cosmopolitanism. This is just one stage, on the way.
Okay, yes, as Lao Tzu says, 千里之行，始于足下. We're just going to take 1,000-mile journey begins with a single step, right? Professor Sim cited this is for you, Professor Sim. You cite the UDHR as a basis for shared values, but there are many in the global South who critique this view, stating that it reflects Western liberal values and therefore challenge its universal reverence. What do you say to this kind of challenge?
I think that the UDHR consists of articles that support both the first generation as well as the second generation human rights. So admittedly, when it comes to the first generation rights, they're mostly civil and political, and it is more akin to the West and the values that are promoted by the West. But then there are also the later articles that promote the second generation human rights that are, for the purpose of promoting one's social, economic, cultural rights. And so I don't think that it's necessarily limited and oriented toward Western culture. And ultimately, there are claims that are definitely supportive of the more communal nature and emphasis of Eastern nations.
So we have a question. What are the commonalities and differences about the understanding of the common good between Eastern and Western thought? Father Uslar, would you like to take this for a few comments?
Wow, that's another impossible question to answer.
Well, I give all the things that require impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, the common good. I know that there's a lot of there has been a lot of talk about certain incompatibilities in thought between East and West, for example, and that is, I don't know, this is the first thing that comes to my mind, and I think that certainly there has been a very strong stream, I think, in both Greek and Roman thought, in Western thought in general, of looking at philosophy as something that provides a universally valid answer. No matter what point of view you have, this does apply to the entire human race. It's not simply by culture alone. And of course, some people have challenged this view, saying, well, that's just a Western imperialistic way of looking at the world, where you come to a conclusion and then everyone has to follow it. But I'll just say this very briefly. I've taught these comparative courses as well between East and West, and I am constantly, and I'm a Westerner, I was born in London, England, but I'm constantly moved when I read Confucian texts, and also, as kind of somewhat eccentric as he is, when I read Mozi, for example, and when I read these other thinkers, or when I read Japanese, I'm a specialist on Japan. When I read Japanese Buddhist texts, there is something in all of those texts. When you read Mengzi or Kongzi or Mozi or Xunzi, for example, Xunzi, human nature is fundamentally corrupt. Well, that also looks like Augustinianism in a certain way. The idea of original sin. You just see that there is a pursuit of the common good in all of these cultures. And they're all reflecting in ways which are intelligible if you make the effort to the other culture as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And just maybe to put teeny little thing on the end of that is we've got to, we may have different answers to what the common good is. But one of the things that strikes me is that it's just unambiguously true that everyone's seeking it. And so that right there gives us a place to start talking about how your conception might compare with mine, how as Professor Sun talks about the family. I think everywhere I've ever gone, families seem pretty important. So we have a starting point to start on what I think is already a common conversation. At this point, I'd just like to thank our three panelists and Father Spadaro and Vice President Banchoff for organizing this, and encourage people who are listening in to continue the conversation, maybe with on our other platform, or to contact us and continue this dialogue. Thank you very much.